So there's four parts. The first is starting with why. So some of the imperative for why are we talking about nature in the context of coaching and leadership. I'm going to share four frameworks for you that have come from psychologists, scientists working on the sort of the interface and the interrelationships between humans and nature, if you like, which I think are quite relevant to us thinking about leadership and coaching. And then go into a bit more depth around nature connectedness. What is this concept of nature connectedness? How does it draw on the benefits of time engaging with and being in nature for health, and how does it then turn itself into an asset, hopefully for the planet in return? And then the last section is offering you some examples really of frames that are useful from working and partnering with nature that you might be able to apply in your work or to start to think about in your work. So why? I thought I'd start with a quote. I expect many of you have heard of Gregory Bateson. He's the author of the concept of ecology of mind. He's a philosopher. And I think coming out of the Conference of the Parties recently, and our, the awareness I'm sure that we have as a group here is there is a disconnect. Has been an increasing disconnect through industrialization between the way we think and the way nature works, as he puts it. And some of the consequences of that are really stark. So I'm going to start with a couple of statistics which I think drill this point home, if it needs to be. The first is we are facing the Anthropocene and another wave of extinction on the planet. And since I was born, which is quite a long time ago, something like 60% of mammalian biomass has been lost from this planet. There is 60% less creatures in this world, fewer creatures. And in terms of species, according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, 28% of the species that we know about are currently at threat of extinction. Let's let that sink in, because it's quite a sobering concept and thought. We also know that over a third of the action required to keep this planet below 1.5 degrees of warming is action around nature, around restoring ecosystems, restoring ecosystem health. So clearly, anything we can do to galvanize citizen action, individual action that contributes towards enhancement and reversal of some of these trends that we're seeing in the world is a good thing. No matter how small, anything we can do can make a difference, as well as the bigger, more systemic political shifts and changes that we need to make in our societies. But you could bring this close to home. There's been an ongoing survey in England for quite a long time, which measures public opinion and activity in relation to nature and green space. And in England, the latest stats show that a quarter of adults, more or less, haven't been outside into a green space within 2 weeks, and there's about 10% that haven't been in more than 2 months. So although the pandemic for a lot of people has been a reawakening of the importance and value of local green space, because it was the only place we could go, there are still big chunks of society that really aren't actually engaging in green spaces and therefore receiving the benefits from them that I'll talk about quite a bit in a bit. And this is important because not having green space nearby shortens your life and may actually lead to morbidities. So this is some work from some Dutch researchers in 2003. They estimated that a 10% reduction in green space is about 5 years off your life. And we know that there are some massive issues of social justice linked to climate justice. If you're from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background, you're twice as likely, in England at least, to live in green space deprived areas. And that's certainly the case in the United States, and I'm sure it'll be the case in many, many other countries in the global north. So although some of these these things I'm telling you about are relatively recent findings. People have clearly, as we know, been working on trying to understand the relationship between humans and the natural world for a very long time. And I'm going to share four frameworks from some of those researchers with you. The first is probably the most famous. It's from Edward Wilson, the biophilia hypothesis. I don't know if any of you ever read his book, Biophilia. And the theory he postulated essentially was that humans have an inborn tendency to affiliate with nature. So it's our default mode. It's how we're meant to be. And if you think about how long it is since we become an erect human species, it's about 2 million years. Our industrial time is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that, 0.01% of that. And one of the important things that he did, as it creates a thread through all of these frameworks actually, is start to try and suggest some values that could be measurable, that help us understand the ways in which we interact with the more than human world. So values like utility, how can we use nature to help us, I don't know, for example, extracting timber for building. But also some values like the value of aesthetics and the value of symbolism, which we know have sort of defined, for example, art through human history, and have recently been shown to be really, really important in creating a personal sense of connection to the natural world. In stepped Kaplan and Kaplan in the late 90s, and their work on attention restoration. So this is a really important piece of the puzzle. They came at this from the point of view as psychologists that when we get some of the stress that we feel as species is about the environments that we spend our time in. And urban environments, the kinds of things we're doing every day on Zoom, juggling email and tasks and phones, are cognitively really tiring. So these processes here are very calorific and they get tired easily. And when we get tired, our attention gets tired, we make bad choices. For them, they were interested in choices around eating, for example, and obesity that comes from stress and a lack of restoration of attention. And some of the work they did suggested that natural environments are most powerful in terms of restoring attention by turning off those busy cognitive modes and turning on our default modes, which are a complex interrelated set of brain structures, links to the parasympathetic nervous system, and is kind of the opposite to fight or flight. And a very related theory from Roger Ulrich then looked at what might be going on specifically in terms of stress. Famous study of his was looking at patients recovering from gallbladder operations in hospital. Half the patients could see trees out of their hospital window and the other half a brick wall. And those who saw trees left hospital on average over a day earlier than the other patients. They demanded less medication and they were much less grumpy and miserable to their nurses. So they were able, in those patients, what was happening was that they were be able to come out of that fight or flight and be engaging their vagal nerve, their parasympathetic nervous system, and these networks in us that allow us our immune system to flourish and to help us recover from intensive stress like operations. So we know that we've got an inborn affinity with nature. We know that it helps us restore our attention. I know it helps us reduce stress. And then Mayer and France suggested that there are some key features, if you like, of nature that allows us to create that sense of oneness. And they identified a nature connectedness scale, and we're going to have a go at that later on. And that is a means of measuring how nature connected we are. And they and researchers since have shown that people who are highly nature connected, according to that scale, have much higher self-esteem, much higher life satisfaction, and in fact are twice as likely to take action for the planet. So this is really critical. For me, is one of the most exciting and influential pieces of research on the work that I do. Not just about what we get as a human benefit from being with nature, but that it ignites us to want to take action in return. So we're going to take a moment just to do some attention restoration of our own. So if you've got headphones, you're free to pop them on. If not, it'll still work. And I'm just going to invite you to take a moment to be present with this clip. To help us feel calmer. I wonder if anyone would like to share what came up for them watching that short clip. Flow. I mean, there's some things that are happening, you know, biologically, physiologically, as you've all sort of expressed. The fractals that you could see, those patterns in the leaves and branches, are shown to relax us. And the natural sounds, like the birds we heard, they're also shown to be relaxing scientifically. Sunlight, as well as, you know, being essential for vitamin D and some of those more medical benefits, if you like, it also just lifts our mood and helps us feel less tired. And anyone who sort of has any seasonal affective disorder or just a general kind of sense of glumness when it's winter and it's dark would know that. If we were out there in that forest, and particularly if there were pine trees around, we'd be benefiting from the scent. So the terpenes, the limonene, some of the other forest aerosols have been shown to reduce blood pressure, lower stress hormones like cortisol, even encourage natural killer cells, which are important in fighting cancers. And the soil itself contains harmless bacteria, Mycobacterium vaccae, which can also lower stress and fight inflammation. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on that passively, if you like, we benefit from. But we're also interested in benefiting in slightly more active ways. Samuel Johnson put this rather beautifully. If I'm going to share four things with you now, that the C and A and R and an E, it spells out the acronym CARE. And if you like, if you extend that definition of happiness slightly to include sort of a sense of a life well lived and a worthwhile, productive, then these four areas are examples really of how we can join ourselves with the happiness. So the first is creativity. Perhaps a slightly surprising benefit of being in nature, but just 25 minutes activates, as I said before, this default mode network. But what that means is that we have access to working memory more easily than we do when we're in a sort of a busy, stressed place. We're more flexible in our thinking. We're able to focus better in our attention. And some studies in Sweden, I think it was, with artists showed that when they put artists creating in a creative process outdoors versus indoors, they were measurably more creative outdoors through the initial phase of the creative process, preparation phase, the incubation phase. So if we want to be creative and allow ourselves to find innovation and new ways of tackling the problems in our lives and in the wider world, then being outside during that time can really help us. This is probably the most straightforward part, the active, getting out, being active, physical health benefits of nature. And as I said before, having green space near and locally accessible to you makes a difference to how long you live and the diseases that you may suffer from. Researchers have found 15 clusters of diseases, including things like anxiety and depression, which are much more common in communities that live further than a kilometre from natural green space. Other researchers have shown that it's something like 2 hours a week is the amount of time we should be spending outside to be able to avert and avoid some of these consequences. We also know that in England, at least, 34% of men, 42% of women are not meeting the basic UK guidelines on physical activity. And physical activity costs us £1 billion a year in terms of the NHS. So getting out, being active, really important. Another perhaps surprising benefit is that being out and engaged in nature is an opportunity to, as Henry David Thoreau put it, witness our limits transgressed. And this is about this concept of awe. Awe is the sense of a small self in relation to something more mysterious, vaster, more powerful, bigger than you are. And an incredibly important part of being in nature, and maybe Geo, this is part of that, or that sort of deep down sense of connection that we can reawaken, lying on your back, looking at these big trees. Studies in California by researchers like Paul Piff, Dr. Keltner, and others have been really enlightening. They took people into urban areas and woodlands with very tall trees, and they accidentally spilled some boxes of pens, the researchers, in front of the research subjects, and they counted how many pens did people pick up and return as a measure of their generosity, their helping behaviour. And it was far more significant when they are outdoors under those trees. So actually, being in awe, in nature, makes us more generous, makes us help, makes us kinder, and actually increases our ethical decision making. And some of the benefits have been shown to have really long tails. So taking, for example, military vets out into nature experiences in America has been shown to have benefits for well-being and stress and a sense of personal growth that lasts well over a week after the actual experience. And then the final one is about eudaimonia. You probably know the Greek word that together with hedonia form this sort of modern concept of happiness. And when we say happiness, we generally think of the joy, the hedonia, but actually eudaimonia is about the sense of a life well lived, that you're satisfied with the life with what you have in it. And there are over 50 studies now which show that people who are more nature connected have much higher life satisfaction, almost double the life satisfaction. And they also have they're much more likely to have higher self-esteem, and for their self-esteem to be measurably greater. For those of you that are coaches will know, so often our clients are coming to us with questions of self-confidence, self-esteem, what they want in life. So really that nature does provide us with a route to meet some basic psychological needs, a sense of autonomy, a sense of competence, a sense of relatedness, which then allows us to lean into this idea of life satisfaction. So I thought I'd just do a quick experiment with you. So I'm going to read out some statements, and I wondered if you could scribble down on a bit of paper a score out of 5 for each one, where 5 is very strongly agree and 1 is you strongly disagree. Okay, so the first one is, I often feel a sense of oneness with the natural world around me. I think of the natural world as a community to which I belong. I have a deep understanding of how my actions affect the natural world. And I recognize and appreciate the intelligence of other living organisms. To ask some more questions at the end. So, um, what I'm offering you now is a section around how a little bit to bring nature into coaching and leading and our lives. And I think, for example, specifically around coaching, I think an approach to a more nature-based way of working and it allows people not just to be having coaching around an individual crisis they might have, to be able to put it in the context of what's happening in the wider world and to bring the wider world, global in this sense, into the room. I think it's often not the case in coaching. It's often, and I think there's often a huge opportunity to do that. I think, as I've described, I think the ways in which we thrive and flourish from being in a greater sense of oneness with nature can actually allow us to increase our capacity and capability, not only to be the best person we want to be, but to become, if that's appropriate for us, the person we want to be in the communities that we want to have. And then last but not least, and this really is what drives me, it's not just about us, this is about igniting action through that deeper sense of nature connection. We protect what we love, as the Senegalese Forester Baba Dioum said. So this is a really key part of that last statement. So how? So there are now some really excellent and validated, peer-reviewed papers on nature connection, which have been able to demonstrate very clearly that there are 5 key pathways for us to follow to deepen that sense of nature connection, as measured by the kinds of questions that I asked you earlier, which come directly from the nature connectedness scale of Mayer and Franz. So the first is around contact, and that's really about our senses. So when we're lying on our back looking up at those trees, to think about the senses that are being engaged. I'll come on to that a bit more in a minute when I give you some examples. Secondly, meaning. We know that meaning is incredibly important, not just at an individual level, but also as a community and societal level. What meaning does this nature or this part of the natural world have for us? Thirdly, I'm going to come back to compassion. Thirdly is emotion. So to really connect not just our heads and our bodies, but our emotional centers as well, thinking about the feelings that are generated from that time and space in the natural world. And then beauty, what's beautiful about this element of nature that I'm experiencing, and how might I engage with it? I might engage by looking at it, I might engage by drawing or taking photographs or some other activity. And then finally, what could we do? To ask ourselves questions about what we could do. And as Gio and Anna were discussing, you know, there may be some easy ways to find out some ideas of what you could do, but we may be able to have to create our own sense of something small to start with and build on. So 5 pathways, really, really important. My other consultancy, the Human Nature Partnership, is really trying to use the 5 pathways to inform everything that we do with our partners. So I'll just give you 3 examples, really. So thinking about that contact piece, which is really relevant to this idea in coaching now of a coaching mindset. How, you know, what's the work that we need to do as coaches or as leaders ourselves in order to show up with the best possible mindset. And the senses in nature is a really fantastic opportunity to develop that mindset. Obviously, there's our 5 senses. We don't use all of them, I'm sure, when we're sitting in our rooms behind our screens all the time. So at least thinking into all five of our senses when we're out in nature. But there are also, according to other thinkers like Michael Cohen, a much longer list of senses and sensitivities that we can also develop as humans. So an idea of the weather. We can sense the weather. It's not one of our five senses, but it's a sensitivity that we can develop. And there are many others, and I'd encourage you to have a look at his work. Hunger, humility, stress. They're all senses and sensitivities. And what this does clearly in coaching is it can create new awareness, and out of new awareness come new choices. So it's an opportunity to extend our palette of our awareness of the world, and out of that create new choices about the actions that we take. Second thing I'd offer to you is around emotion. And this is where the idea of emotion and beauty from those five pathways come together with the concept of safety. And sounds like something that, again, Gio and Anna touched on. How do we contract for safety in coaching outdoors? Well, one of the interesting dimensions here is that nature itself, for many people, already offers that sense of safety as a parental presence. I think particularly for young people, there's some recent work which shows that because nature doesn't hold judgment, and young people live in worlds increasingly where they're faced with being judgment and being judged on a constant basis, there is a chance to get away and start to regulate our emotions. If we can work with nature and help people feel safe in nature's presence, then actually we can deepen the sense of trust and safety that we might already have between a coach and a client, or a leader and their member of staff. And when we have really great trust and safety, we can have greater challenge, and challenge stretches us and helps us to grow and explore other new territories. And out of that might be an appreciation of beauty, not just, I'd offer, as a beauty of the natural world, but as a beauty of ourselves and what's within us. And then finally, compassion and meaning. Those two pathways come together in some ways. What is the opportunity for grounding the action we want to take in our lives in that wider context that would emerge through being more nature connected? How do we move from ego to eco in our thinking? And how might that develop compassion, not just for nature, but for ourselves and our communities, and enable and facilitate, as the International Coaching Federation calls it, facilitate client growth. So hopefully that's a helpful set of suggestions around the how. There are many, many more ways in which working with nature, in partnership with nature, can benefit coaching and leadership. I haven't touched on them all here. I will send you a slide as part of this pack, which includes some other areas, thinking about metaphor, thinking about centering, and so on.